This peculiar story tells of a scholar. One day, he was invited to his friend's house for a meal and drinks. The two of them had a very enjoyable time chatting. The fun ended late at night. The scholar bid farewell to his friend to return home, while the night was late and all living things had fallen into a quiet stillness. Seeing that the scholar was already a bit tipsy, his friend was worried and offered him a place to stay for the night. However, the scholar politely declined his friend's kind gesture, worried that his wife at home would be anxious. The scholar was determined to go home. Although his steps were wobbly, he still managed to climb onto his horse to ride home. In his drunken state, the scholar simply let the horse guide him home. The alcohol made his mind hazy, and he could no longer tell directions. As the alcohol took a stronger hold, the scholar could no longer endure it. He slumped over the horse's back, falling into a deep sleep, completely unaware of what was about to happen. A chilling wind woke the scholar with a start. He looked around in a daze, shocked to find himself in the middle of a dense, unfamiliar forest. Startled, the scholar quickly pulled the reins, signaling the horse to stop. He tried to compose himself and assess the situation in the quiet night. The scholar looked everywhere but only saw tall trees and darkness all around him. He was completely disoriented, not knowing where he had gotten lost. Realizing that riding a horse in this dense forest was very inconvenient and dangerous, the scholar decided to get off his horse and walk it to find a way out. He walked cautiously, his eyes scanning for a trail or any sign of human presence, hoping to escape the eerie forest. After a short distance, the horse suddenly became extremely frightened. It let out a piercing neigh and reared up as if it had seen something very terrifying. Before its master could react, the horse turned around and galloped away into the darkness, disappearing without a trace in an instant, leaving the scholar confused. Now, the scholar was all alone in the dark, cold forest. Fear and despair began to consume his mind. Just when he was most afraid, the scholar suddenly heard the sound of people laughing and clinking glasses echoing from a distance. This sound sparked a glimmer of hope in his heart. Overjoyed, he followed the sound and found a clearing. There, he saw 3 men sitting around a stone table, happily drinking wine. The scholar quickly walked over and politely bowed. He asked them for help, hoping that they could show him the way out of the forest. Hearing someone, all 3 men turned to look. At first, they seemed surprised and stunned to see a stranger's sudden appearance. After a moment of surprise, they immediately became very friendly. They enthusiastically invited the scholar to sit down and join them, saying it had been a long time since they had a guest. Faced with their hard-to-refuse hospitality, the scholar had no choice but to sit at the table. They poured him a full cup of wine and invited him to drink to get acquainted. Without any suspicion, the scholar raised the cup to his lips and drained it in one gulp. The strong, warm wine spread through his body, chasing away some of the cold of the late night. Seeing him drink so freely, one person praised his drinking capacity. The person quickly filled his cup and continued to invite the scholar to drink more. And so, one cup of wine followed another. The men continuously plied him with wine, and the scholar, in his drunken state, happily drank every cup without refusing. When the alcohol had taken effect, the scholar, in high spirits, wanted to show off his talent. He had a special talent for ventriloquism and could imitate the sounds of many different birds. The scholar began to imitate a rooster crowing. Hearing this sound, the 3 men suddenly became panicked and afraid. anxiously looking at each other as if something bad was about to happen. Seeing their reaction, the scholar found it amusing and continued to tease them. He switched to imitating the sounds of other birds, and their chirping echoed throughout the forest. When they realized it was just the sound of birds singing and not a rooster crowing to signal dawn, the three men breathed a sigh of relief. The tension on their faces gradually dissipated. Seeing their expressions, the scholar couldn't hold back his laughter. He revealed that all those sounds were produced by him using his ventriloquism skill. Knowing they had been tricked, the three men were not angry but found it very entertaining. They laughed heartily and praised the scholar for being a very talented and funny person. One of them invited the scholar. They said that on the upcoming Mid-Autumn Festival, they would gather here again, and they hoped he could come and celebrate with them. At this moment, the scholar suddenly remembered his wife waiting for him at home. He was worried and quickly asked the three men for directions, hoping they could show him the way out of the forest. Instead of giving directions, the men offered to perform a show to repay his talent. They wanted to have some fun before they parted ways for the night. Without waiting for the scholar's consent, they began their performance. One person stood firm as a base, while another took a run up and leaped into the air effortlessly. The second person landed perfectly on the first person's shoulders. Immediately after, the third person performed a similar jump, landing on the second person's shoulders. The three of them stacked on top of each other, forming a steady human column. The scholar was astonished and admired their skill, but also worriedly urged them to come down quickly before an accident happened. Unexpectedly, the three men stacked on top of each other suddenly straightened their bodies like a piece of wood, then simply collapsed to the ground without any effort to brace or crouch. The scholar was startled and reached out to catch them, but there was no one there. The three men had mysteriously vanished into thin air right in front of him. As he stood there in a daze, a small path suddenly appeared right where the three men had fallen, as if it had been created by them. He turned to look at the stone table from earlier, but now it was just a moss-covered rock. The cups, plates, wine, and food had all disappeared, as if the party had never happened. Too scared to stay any longer, the scholar quickly followed the small path that had just appeared. He ran blindly until he reached home. As soon as he got home, the scholar began to feel violently nauseous. He vomited uncontrollably, and his wife was very worried and scared. What was strange was that everything he vomited out was a horrifying green color. It swirled in the basin, giving off a strange smell that would make anyone shudder. The scholar tried to remember, but he couldn't recall what he had eaten and drunk. The party in the forest now seemed hazy, like a nightmare. The nightmare didn't stop there. Even when he went to the restroom, he was horrified to realize that his urine was also a scary green color, exactly like his vomit. After being bedridden for many days, the scholar gradually recovered. From then on, he never dared to attend the Mid-Autumn Festival reunion and never walked on the streets at night again. This strange story tells of a poor scholar on his way to the capital for the imperial examinations. He traveled through the dark night, carrying a large basket of books on his back. By the time he reached a small town, night had already fallen. The scholar saw an inn and decided to go in to find a place to rest. The hour was late as the tired scholar entered the inn and asked the innkeeper if there were any vacant rooms, hoping to find some cheap lodging. As it was the examination season, all the inns were full. The innkeeper told him that only a single superior room was left, and the price was certainly not cheap. The scholar asked if there were any cheaper rooms, but the innkeeper flatly refused. With his meager purse, he could not afford the expensive room. The scholar had no choice but to leave, dejected. Behind him, the old innkeeper muttered contemptuously, sneering that a pauper like him was bound to run into ghosts traveling at night. Leaving the town, the scholar saw a small slope. On the hillside was a temple of modest size, looking desolate and devoid of people. In the darkness, the scholar headed towards the temple, hoping he could ask for shelter for the night. He had no other choice but to try his luck. But when he entered the temple courtyard, he found that the main door was securely locked. Everything was eerily silent, with no signs of life. Feeling too exhausted to turn back or go on, the scholar looked around and noticed a small, covered porch in a corner of the yard used for storing firewood, which could offer shelter from the wind and rain. He decided to huddle in a corner under the eaves, planning to stay there until morning. The night grew colder and more silent. He didn't know how long he had been asleep when he suddenly felt a bone-chilling cold. He groggily opened his eyes, trying to see through the thick darkness. In his daze, he saw a monk slowly walk into the courtyard. The monk's appearance was solitary and strange, not at all like an ordinary person. Because it was too dark, the scholar could not see the monk's face clearly, nor could he tell if the person was old or young. He could only see a lone, shuffling figure. The monk walked straight to the locked door, but somehow managed to open it and enter the temple's main hall with ease. Stranger still, the monk climbed directly onto the altar and embraced the head of the Buddha statue. He caressed it while letting out a strange, contented laugh. The scholar had intended to approach and ask for lodging, but upon seeing the monk's bizarre actions, he grew frightened and didn't dare get closer. He quietly returned to his corner under the eaves, telling himself it was better to endure one cold night. He decided to leave early the next morning. The next morning, the scholar emerged from his shelter. He was still puzzled by the events of the previous night and decided to inspect the temple hall one more time. When he reached the door, he was surprised to find it was locked just as tightly as before, as if no one had opened it during the night. Just as the scholar was about to turn and leave, he suddenly smelled a strange, foul stench wafting from inside the room, which made him shudder. Curious and a little scared, the scholar peeked through a crack in the window to see what was inside. The sight that met his eyes terrified him. He saw a monk lying motionless on the floor, right in front of the altar. Judging by the state of the body, it seemed the person had been dead for a very long time. The scholar was utterly horrified and quickly turned and fled. He ran headlong down the mountain, his mind filled with the image of that terrifying corpse. He ran straight to the magistrate's office to report the crime, shouting non-stop, "Someone is dead! Someone is dead!" urging the officials to investigate the scene quickly. However, as the first person to discover the body, the scholar was suspected of being the murderer. He was bound by soldiers and escorted back to the temple. The magistrate's men broke the lock and entered the room. Daylight streamed in, revealing the monk's corpse sprawled on the cold earthen floor. After the coroner examined the body, the results showed that the monk had been dead for several days. His body had numerous bruises and signs of decomposition. The coroner reported to the magistrate that the victim had been dead for at least 2 days, with many torture-related wounds on his body, and his throat was cut by a sharp object. Hearing this, the scholar was stunned and bewildered. He stammered that it was impossible because he had seen the monk return from outside just last night. The official questioned him about what else he had seen. The frightened scholar recounted that last night he had even seen the monk embrace the head of the Buddha statue and laugh strangely. He described in detail to the magistrate how he had seen the monk climb the altar and caress the Buddha statue's head while laughing. Hearing the scholar's account, the official also felt something was strange. He raised his head, his eyes full of suspicion, and stared at the head of the Buddha statue. To uncover the truth behind the mysterious murder and the scholar's story, the official decided to investigate more thoroughly, starting with the Buddha statue itself. The official ordered one of his men to go up and see if there was anything there. The soldier obeyed, approaching the Buddha statue to inspect it as commanded. The soldier carefully felt around the head of the Buddha statue. He was surprised to discover a secret mechanism which, when pressed, opened a hidden compartment inside. Inside the secret compartment was a hoard of gold, silver, and precious gems. The astonished soldier reported the hidden wealth to the magistrate. The magistrate immediately understood everything. He asserted that this fortune must have been hidden by the deceased monk, and this was also the motive for the murder. The magistrate surmised that a few days prior, thieves had broken in, tortured the monk to force him to reveal the hiding place of his money, and then murdered him and locked the door. The magistrate concluded that the monk's ghost, unable to part with its wealth, still lingered here, returning each night to embrace the treasure it had hidden. The scholar was proven innocent. Because his report had helped solve the murder case, he was not punished but was considered to have performed a meritorious service. Not only was he set free, but he was also rewarded with some money from the magistrate's office. The official advised him to continue on his journey and not to stay in such desolate places again.
This terrifying story took place in a small town in Zhengzhou, where a wealthy family by the surname Xu resided. The head of the Xu family was named Chen, and he had a peculiar obsession. He loved eating snake meat. It wasn't on the table every meal, but nearly every day. There had to be at least one dish made of snake meat. To him, it was the ultimate delicacy. He firmly believed that snake meat could enhance his virility and even prolong his lifespan. Just for snake meat alone, he had devised dozens of recipes and even hired a personal chef dedicated to preparing snake dishes for him. To ensure a constant supply of snakes, he ordered his servants to catch live ones every day. His household staff was rigorously trained, no matter the size, venomous or not. As long as they caught a snake, they had to bring it back to him. As long as a snake was captured, whether it was alive or dead, it didn't matter. His servants worked tirelessly, knowing that those who caught more snakes would receive generous rewards. Beyond food, Chen also considered using snakes for making medicinal wine and remedies, so he captured everything from hatchlings to fully grown serpents. Year after year, countless snakes were slaughtered in the Xu household. One day, Chen rode out on horseback for some business. Midway through his journey, the clear blue sky was suddenly swallowed by dark clouds. A deafening clap of thunder roared, sending his horse into a panic. The frightened horse reared up, throwing him off before bolting away. Around him, a storm began to brew, whipping sand and dirt into the air. Within moments, fierce winds howled violently. The sky darkened completely, making visibility difficult, and the servants accompanying him were scattered by the strong gusts. Chen struggled against the relentless wind, forcing himself to move forward. He had no idea how long he had been walking when he vaguely spotted a temple ahead. Thinking he could take shelter there until the storm passed, he made his way toward it. After knocking on the door, an elderly abbot appeared. Chen humbly requested a place to stay for the night to escape the storm. The abbot welcomed him kindly. Since it was already dinner time, he asked if Chen was hungry. Feeling hungry at that moment, Mr. Chen immediately said that it would be wonderful to have a bowl of snake meat to eat in such stormy weather. Chen blurted out his thought without much consideration, unaware that the monks around him had immediately widened their eyes in anger. Realizing that monks were strict vegetarians, he quickly apologized for his inappropriate words. A short while later, a young monk brought him a bowl of soup. Chen eagerly waited, his stomach growling with hunger. Lifting the lid, he was astonished to find that the soup contained snake meat. His eyes lit up in excitement. He never expected to be served snake meat in a temple. Driven by hunger, he paid no attention to the monk's strange expressions and devoured the entire bowl, meat and all. After finishing his meal, he stayed at the temple for the night. As he drifted into deep sleep, he felt something writhing and slithering across his body. Jolting awake, he opened his eyes and nearly let out a terrified scream. His bed was crawling with countless snakes, their shimmering scales reflecting the dim moonlight. In sheer panic, he leaped off the bed, intending to flee, but tripped and fell. A massive green snake blocked his path. From the rafters above, another serpent slithered down. Frozen with fear, Chen found himself unable to move. The enormous green snake coiled around, cutting off his escape route. Overwhelmed by terror, Chen collapsed onto the floor as countless smaller snakes slithered onto his body. More and more of them piled on, covering him from head to toe. They constricted around him so tightly that he could no longer breathe. He felt as if he was being swallowed whole. He had no idea how much time had passed when suddenly he heard someone calling his name. He jolted awake, flailing his arms and screaming, only to realize he was no longer in the temple. The snakes were gone. Standing before him were two farmers, staring at him in confusion. They explained that they had found him unconscious in the woods and came to help. From that day on, he never so much as thought about eating snake meat again. In fact, even the sight of anything remotely snake-like sent him into a fit of trembling fear. Ever since that incident, he developed a severe phobia of snakes. Just hearing the word made his limbs go weak, his face turn pale, and his breath become ragged.
This strange story happened one day when a strange-looking monk suddenly appeared on the city streets, attracting the attention of the surrounding people with his unusual appearance. This monk wore a cassock patched all over, silently wandering the streets, his eyes pensive. It was unclear what he was searching for. In recent years, this city had experienced a continuous series of mysterious disappearances. The victims were mainly women and children, causing great panic among the people. The strange appearance and movements of this monk quickly caught the attention of the officials in the magistrate's office, causing them to become suspicious. They noticed that this monk never went on alms rounds, nor did he seek food or lodging. His mysterious behavior was indeed very suspicious. All day he just wandered the city, not begging for alms, nor eating, drinking, or resting. The officials decided to secretly follow him to investigate. Even when kind-hearted citizens proactively brought food to offer him, the monk would just join his palms and refuse, not accepting any of it. Even when people wanted to give him money, he wouldn't even glance at it, his attitude so indifferent as if wealth were merely a worldly possession. After 2 days of wandering, the monk suddenly stopped in front of a wealthy family's home and sat down to meditate, making the two officials extremely curious. They inquired and learned that this was a wealthy household that had moved in a few years prior, engaged in trade, but no one knew what goods they dealt in. On the first day, the family's butler brought out food to offer, but the monk didn't eat, nor did he accept it, just sitting silently with his eyes closed. On the second day, the butler again brought out money as a gift, hoping he would leave. But the monk still refused, completely unmoved. He only said that he did not come here for those things. No matter how he was treated, he was determined to sit there and not leave. When the butler pressed him for his purpose, the monk only replied that his master knew very well. After saying that, he closed his eyes and continued to meditate. The two observing officials couldn't guess his purpose either. They could only watch patiently, hoping to find a clue to the case. A few days later, the butler lost all patience. He ordered the servants to carry the meditating monk to one side to clear the path. Immediately after, several horse-drawn carriages carrying large wooden crates were pushed out from the courtyard. The servants were hurried, urging each other to move quickly lest they be late. Being dragged away, the monk suddenly opened his eyes, wrenched himself free from the hands holding him, his gaze becoming extremely solemn. He quickly rushed in front of the convoy, stretching out his arms to block the way, determined not to let them leave, his attitude extremely resolute and decisive. Seeing this, the butler became furious. He pointed at the monk and ordered the servants to pick up their clubs to teach him a lesson. The monk did not evade, just stood still and took the beating, letting the merciless wooden clubs rain down on his frail body. Despite being beaten until his head was bleeding, he did not resist at all, nor did he cry out once, his eyes remaining unusually firm. Seeing the situation was not right, one of the two officials stayed to watch, while the other rushed off to call for reinforcements to stop the crime. In the end, the monk was beaten to death by the cruel servants. His body lay motionless on the ground, blood spreading from his wounds. Having killed someone, the butler nonchalantly ordered his subordinates to wrap the monk's body in a mat and take it to the desolate burial ground for burial. The official hiding behind a tree witnessed the entire process of them taking the monk's body away to be disposed of hastily and secretly. Just as the group was about to leave, reinforcements from the magistrate's office arrived, blocking all their escape routes, giving no one a chance to flee. Upon opening the wooden crates, the magistrate's office discovered they were filled with the missing women and children. This family was indeed a human trafficking ring. After arresting the entire criminal gang, the officials returned to the desolate burial ground to exhume the monk's body for proper funeral rites. But when they dug it up, they only found an empty straw mat. The monk's body had vanished. Since then, no one ever saw him again.
This horror story tells of a newly appointed district magistrate. He brought his family and servants to live in the government mansion. As the procession entered the new residence, the local people murmured among themselves. Everyone was curious about the new magistrate, and, stirred by the news, that he would be living in the district office. Most of the townspeople were anxious because the mansion had always been known for its strange occurrences. As expected, after the magistrate moved in, bizarre incidents began happening frequently. Servants and family members were constantly harassed by fox spirits, leaving the household in perpetual unrest. One day, a terrified servant ran to inform the magistrate that a maid, who had been perfectly normal, suddenly started behaving very strangely and urged him to come and see for himself. The magistrate immediately rushed to the courtyard with the servant. There, they saw the maid rolling on the ground. It seemed she had just been possessed by a fox spirit. Sure enough, the maid began licking her hands, her lifeless eyes fixated on the magistrate, while guttural growls, like those of a demon fox, escaped her mouth. The magistrate was stunned. It was clear the fox spirits were causing trouble. The servant further reported that behind the mansion, in the backyard, there was an abandoned house where dozens of foxes had taken up residence, frequently disturbing the peace. Hearing this, the magistrate immediately ordered his men to take him to the backyard to investigate. The servant pointed to a dilapidated house in the distance, stating that it was the den of the foxes. Sure enough, inside the abandoned house, many foxes were hiding. As soon as they heard movement, they began slowly emerging. Upon seeing the group of people approaching, the foxes showed no fear. Instead, they bared their teeth and growled menacingly. The magistrate was furious. These foxes were openly wreaking havoc and had the audacity to defy him right before his eyes. They clearly had no regard for authority. He immediately ordered his subordinates to prepare 10 cannons. By tomorrow, he vowed to level the place and eradicate every last fox spirit. That night, while the magistrate was asleep, his wife was awakened by a deep yet gentle voice. She sat up, looking around in alarm, unsure who was speaking. The voice reassured her not to be afraid. From the shadows emerged an old man, his demeanor humble and respectful. The old man introduced himself as the elder of the Fox clan, living in the backyard. He explained that his people had resided there for a long time and had unintentionally angered the magistrate. He pleaded with the magistrate's wife to speak on their behalf and ask for just 3 days so they could arrange to leave. Before she could fully regain her composure, the old man had already vanished. The next morning, as soon as she woke up, the magistrate's wife recounted the events of the previous night and urged her husband to grant the Fox clan 3 days to relocate. However, the magistrate, enraged, refused to let the creatures continue their mischief for even 1 more day. Ignoring all pleas, he immediately ordered the cannons to be brought forth. The 10 cannons, fully loaded, were aimed at the abandoned house. At the magistrate's command, the soldiers ignited the fuses. A deafening barrage of cannon fire followed. In an instant, blazing cannonballs rained down upon the dilapidated house, reducing it to a pile of rubble. After the bombardment, thick black smoke filled the air. Amid the ruins, the bodies of dozens of foxes lay scattered, the smell of gunpowder mixed with the stench of burned flesh. Only one old fox had managed to escape. Before fleeing, it turned back to look at the magistrate with eyes full of hatred. From that day on, the mansion was no longer disturbed by fox spirits. Years passed, and during his time in office, the magistrate amassed a great deal of wealth through corruption. One day, he ordered his servants to transport the illicit silver to the capital to bribe higher officials in hopes of securing a promotion. Meanwhile, in the capital, An imperial inspector was making his rounds in a sedan chair when an old man knelt in the street, blocking his path. The old man told the inspector that he had knowledge of a serious crime and wished to report it. With the official's permission, he proceeded to accuse the magistrate of murdering his wife and children, his entire family, amounting to dozens of lives. He also exposed the magistrate's embezzlement of public funds and bribery. The old man even claimed he could reveal where the stolen silver was hidden. Upon hearing this, the imperial inspector immediately dispatched men to follow the old man to the location he specified. Sure enough, buried underground, they uncovered a vast amount of silver bars stamped with the government seal, proving the magistrate's corruption. However, no one could verify the claim about the murdered family, as the old man had vanished without a trace. With irrefutable evidence of his crimes, the magistrate was sentenced to execution, along with his entire household. He was locked in a wooden cage, awaiting his final day. As the crowd gathered to witness the execution, the magistrate saw a lone fox quietly turning away, its gaze eerily familiar. At that moment, he finally realized the old fox had returned for revenge. But by then, it was far too late for regrets. The following horror story happened to a man named Wang. His ancestors were once noble lords, and his family was wealthy. However, by his generation, they had fallen into poverty, and he could only make a living through hard labor. One day, after finishing work and heading home, he passed by an abandoned building and suddenly noticed something shining beneath a rock. Picking it up, he discovered it was a gold hairpin. Overjoyed, Wang silently thanked fate for this unexpected fortune. Selling it would be enough to feed him for several days. However, when he flipped the hairpin over, he saw an inscription that read, "Crafted at the Royal Mansion." This reminded him of his ancestors. He realized that taking this item would tarnish his family's honor. So, he decided to wait at the spot for the owner to come looking for it. It wasn't until midnight that he saw an old woman anxiously searching the area. To confirm that she was the rightful owner, Wang carefully asked where the hairpin came from. Without hesitation, she said it was left by her late husband, who was a noble lord. Hearing this, Wang realized that the old woman was the fox spirit wife his great-grandfather had bonded with 100 years ago. He immediately knelt and bowed, recognizing her as his ancestral grandmother. Wang then invited the old woman into his home, but seeing his impoverished living conditions, she felt sorrow for the hardships her descendant endured. Inside, Wang offered her a seat on the crude wooden bed, which also served as their guest area. He expressed his wish for her to stay so that he and his wife could care for her. Touched by his filial piety, the fox grandmother handed him some silver she had saved, advising him to use it as capital to start a business. She then instructed him to take a cart of fabric to the capital, warning him that he must arrive within 4 days. Otherwise, the goods would lose their value. Following her advice, Wang set off with the fabric. However, after 2 days of travel, heavy rain poured down. Worried about the fabric getting wet, he stopped at an inn. Unfortunately, the rain did not stop for 2 days, preventing Wang from continuing his journey. When the weather finally cleared, he hurried to the capital. By the time he arrived, he was 2 days late. The market was flooded with merchants selling fabric, and no one wanted to buy his goods. Wang stopped at a tavern, where the innkeeper told him that had he arrived 2 days earlier, he would have made a fortune because the royal palace had been buying fabric for a grand event. Now, with an oversupply, prices had plummeted. With no other choice, Wang reluctantly sold his fabric at a loss, recovering only a small sum. It was still better than returning empty-handed. But misfortune struck again. That very night, a thief stole the little money he had left. Seeing his plight, the innkeeper took pity on him and allowed him to stay for a while. One day, while wandering the streets, Wang noticed that the locals were passionate about quail fighting. Quail arenas were everywhere in the capital. He decided to invest his remaining money in buying some quails from the countryside to sell for a profit. However, heavy rain struck again, and the quails he bought all died one by one. Just as he was feeling hopeless, the innkeeper, with a keen eye, noticed that the quails hadn't died from illness. They had all been pecked to death by a single surviving quail. The innkeeper realized that this quail was no ordinary bird. It was exceptionally fierce and far stronger than any other quail he had ever seen. He advised Wang to enter it into quail fights. It might bring him a big win. Following this advice, Wang took his quail to the market to compete. Sure enough, his quail was unbeatable, winning every match. Every day, Wang entered his quail into fights, and it never lost. Thanks to the bird, he made a fortune. He was overjoyed. The innkeeper then suggested that although Wang was making money daily, it wasn't a long-term solution. He should take the quail to the royal palace for a major tournament. If he won, the noble lord would surely offer a large sum to buy it. Taking the advice, Wang brought his quail to the royal mansion, which was hosting a grand quail fighting event. As expected, Wang's quail defeated every opponent, including the noble lord's prized battle god quail. The noble lord was extremely impressed and immediately offered 500 tiles of silver to buy Wang's quail. Wang happily agreed, used the money to clear his debts, and returned home with his newfound wealth. With this fortune, he rebuilt his family's prosperity, and his household flourished. He and his wife devoted themselves to caring for their fox grandmother for many years. Then, one day, she disappeared without a word, leaving behind a happy family and a valuable lesson about kindness and seizing opportunities in life. This horror story takes place in a wealthy family. The family had 2 brothers. The elder brother was diligent in his studies, quickly achieving success and getting married. Meanwhile, the younger brother was obsessed with martial arts, spending his days practicing with swords and spears. When the younger brother reached the age of marriage, his father called him into the study to discuss an arranged marriage. However, he flatly refused. The father, appearing strict, told him that he was no longer young and needed to consider getting married and having children. Calmly, the younger brother replied that he already had someone in his heart and reassured his father not to worry too much. After saying this, he turned and left, leaving his father bewildered. The reason he refused marriage was that, since childhood, he had always dreamed of a beautiful girl. So captivated by her, he even hired an artist to paint her portrait and hung it in his room. He believed that one day he would meet her in reality. One year, the younger brother left home to travel and stopped at a small town. At night, he stayed at a friend's house. Ever since he arrived, he had dreamed of the same girl every night. In the dreams, they engaged in intimate acts as if they were husband and wife. However, every time things reached their climax, he would wake up suddenly and she would vanish. After many nights of exhaustion, he decided to stay awake to determine whether she was real or just a dream. He sat on the bed and pretended to be asleep. As expected, she appeared again, approached him, placed her hand on his cheek, and was about to kiss him. When he was certain she was within his grasp, he suddenly opened his eyes and wrapped his arms around her. It was at that moment that he realized she was real. The girl introduced herself and told him her story. She had died young at the age of 15, and her father had sealed her body with a spell behind their house. If, after 30 years, she met someone destined for her, she would come back to life. From that night on, she visited him every evening. They spent an incredibly happy time together. One day, while having a meal together, he asked where she lived and expressed his desire to visit. She told him she resided in the underworld. Then, she took his hand and led him down a long path. In the distance, he saw a vast city. As they reached the city gates, the younger brother saw 2 underworld guards escorting his elder brother inside. Panicking, he called out to his elder brother, asking why he was there. The elder brother was equally shocked to see him. He rushed forward to stop the guards, but they ignored him. One guard pulled the elder brother forward, while the other pushed the younger brother to the ground. One of the guards demanded a bribe, saying that unless the younger brother sent money down to the underworld, his elder brother would be subjected to torture, boiling oil and sharp spikes. Enraged, the younger brother drew his sword and beheaded the guard holding the whip. The remaining guard, terrified, turned to flee, but the younger brother chased him down and sliced him in half. Seeing that he had caused a catastrophe, the girl quickly told him how to escape. She instructed him to return home by waterway, raise mourning flags for 5 days, and not leave the house. After that, everything would settle. He followed her advice, found a boat, and took a long water route back home. Upon arriving, he saw that the mourning flags were already hanging at the entrance. Inside, his elder brother's coffin was placed in the center of the room. Unexpectedly, the elder brother pushed open the coffin lid, sat up, and complained of hunger, demanding food. When a meal was laid out, the elder brother asked about the girl's situation. The younger brother replied that he would go search for her once everything was settled. He instructed his family to keep the doors closed for 5 days and not meet anyone. After the 5 days, things would return to normal. Once everything had settled, he rode his horse as fast as he could back to the city to find her. But she was no longer there. There was no trace of her, as if everything had been erased. That night, in his sleep, an old woman appeared and delivered a message. After he had left, the girl had been imprisoned in the underworld. The old woman had received her kindness and had come to inform him. He begged the old woman to lead him to her. She agreed. Gripping his sword tightly, he followed her. The path to the prison was filled with an eerie, bone-chilling aura. When he arrived, he saw 2 underworld guards attempting to violate the girl. Overcome with rage, he charged forward with his sword to rescue her. He slew both guards and swiftly escaped the prison with her. Suddenly, he awoke to find himself still lying in bed, with the girl sitting beside him. She instructed him to exhume her body and bring it home. Each day he must nourish her with soup and call her name 3 times. After 3 days, she would come back to life. He did exactly as she said, and on the 3rd day, the girl truly revived. A few days later, she had fully returned to normal. Finally, the two were wed with the blessings of their family and those around them. They lived happily together for the rest of their lives.
This horror story tells of a cult that existed long ago. The main character in the story is a disciple of this cult, whose identity remains unknown, but he is skilled in strange, mystical arts. With his abilities, he took in many disciples and taught them secret techniques, all of whom revered him as their master. One day, before leaving on a trip, he called one of his disciples and instructed him to carefully guard 2 basins placed in the main hall, strictly forbidding him from touching them. As soon as the master's figure disappeared, the disciple turned back, his attention fixated on the forbidden basins. The 2 basins were stacked on top of each other and placed upside down. No one knew what was inside that was so important that the master had given such strict instructions. Overcome with curiosity, the disciple secretly opened the basins to take a look. Inside was a basin full of water, with a small boat made of straw floating on the surface. Intrigued, the disciple playfully flipped the boat upside down and then set it upright again. Afterward, he covered the basin as if nothing had happened and casually went about his task. However, not long after, the master returned, drenched from head to toe, his face full of fury. It turned out that the small boat was connected to him, and because it had been disturbed, he had suffered the consequences. The moment he saw the disciple, he immediately slapped him across the face and angrily scolded him for disobeying direct orders. He then severely punished the disciple for touching the boat. The disciple was bruise-beaten while the other disciples whispered amongst themselves. Horror, resentment, the disciple secretly engaged in an affair with one of the master's concubines. However, he did not realize that the master had discovered his betrayal. The master knew that every time the concubine met her lover, she would steal pastries to give to him. So, he poisoned the pastries. As usual, the disciple and the concubine met in secret, unaware of what was coming. They joyfully ate the pastries together. As a result, both of them transformed into fat pigs. The master then summoned a butcher and ordered both pigs to be sorted. Some disciples felt that this act was too cruel, so they secretly informed the deceased disciples' parents. Overcome with grief and rage, the parents immediately reported the master to the authorities, accusing him of using dark magic to harm others. The officials had long wanted to arrest him, so they dispatched a large force to surround and capture him. He, along with his wife and son, were locked in wooden cages and transported to the capital. On the journey, as the convoy passed through a dense forest, the trees suddenly shook violently, revealing the shadow of an unknown creature. It let out an earth-shaking roar before slowly approaching the moving convoy. A massive monster emerged, towering at about 5 to 6 meters tall, with round eyes and sharp fangs. The soldiers were terrified by the sight, and none dared to step forward. At that moment, the master told the officers that they were no match for the creature and advised them not to waste their lives in vain. He continued, saying that only his wife could subdue the beast, and demand that they release her first. Left with no choice, the soldiers freed his wife. Without hesitation, she approached the monster. Just then, the creature grabbed her with one hand and lifted her into the air. Then, it swallowed her whole without even chewing. Licking its lips, it slowly advanced toward the horrified soldiers. The master then suggested they release his son next, claiming that once the monster was full, it would not harm anyone else. The officers hesitated but ultimately released the boy. However, like his mother, he was immediately seized by the creature. The child suffered the same fate, devoured in a single gulp. Finally, the master demanded his own release, claiming that only he could deal with the beast. Parched with fear, the officers immediately unbound him. The moment he was free, he summoned all his strength and charged toward the monster. As expected, the creature swiftly grabbed him. Lifting him into the air, it opened its mouth wide and swallowed him whole, just like the others. Once it had eaten its fill, the monster turned and vanished into the forest without a trace. The terrified officers collapsed to the ground before returning to report the incident. The authorities confirmed that the entire cultist's family had perished, so no further action was taken. However, years later, someone spotted him at a market. His entire family seemed to have merely faked their deaths. Whether the monster was his pet or just an illusion remains a mystery to this day. This strange story tells of a scholar in the capital who was close to his cousin. One day, he set out to attend his cousin's birthday party. Before leaving, his wife reminded him to be careful on the road. His cousin lived in a distant town, so the scholar had to ride along a mountain path to get there. Halfway, a man caught up with him and asked where he was headed. The scholar honestly said he was going to his cousin's birthday. The man claimed he too was heading there and said he was an old friend of the cousin. Happy to find a companion, the scholar continued riding with him. Oddly, the man stayed behind him the whole time. The scholar invited him to ride ahead, but he refused. Dark clouds suddenly gathered overhead, and thunder roared loudly. Fearing rain, the scholar urged him to hurry, but the man still lagged behind. Growing suspicious, the scholar occasionally glanced back. Once, he saw the man's eyes glowing green and a long red tongue flicking toward him. Alarmed, he looked again but found the man back to normal, making him doubt himself. Despite his worries, the scholar arrived at his cousin's house. His cousin warmly welcomed both of them inside. Still uneasy, the scholar privately asked if the man was really a longtime friend. His cousin confirmed it. That night, because the house was crowded, the cousin arranged for the scholar and the friend to share a room. Claiming cowardice, the scholar brought a servant to sleep between them and stayed alert. After some time, hearing steady snoring, the scholar finally relaxed. Reassured, he drifted off to sleep. Later, he awoke to horrifying sounds of bones crunching. Shocked, he sat up to see the servant being devoured by the man. Seeing the scholar awake, the man lunged at him, tongue flicking greedily. Terrified, the scholar cried out, "Holy Spirit, save me!" Instantly, a radiant divine being appeared and struck at the creature with a sword. The man transformed into a giant butterfly with human limbs. After a fierce battle, the creature dissolved into nothingness, leaving the scholar stunned. He quickly woke his cousin and showed him the gruesome scene, recounting everything. They rushed to visit the real friend's home, only to find him bedridden with a serious illness. It turned out he had never left his house, meaning the imposter was a malicious entity. Its true nature remains unknown. This strange story tells of a merchant who, in order to sell salt, colluded with a high official to manipulate the price of salt to an exorbitant level, making it unaffordable for the common people. Unable to buy salt, some people resorted to secretly bringing salt back from other places. But this merchant had arranged for his henchmen to patrol. Anyone caught was brutally tortured. Beaten, they could only cry out in pain and beg for their lives. Because they couldn't afford the salt he sold and wanting to survive, they had no choice but to smuggle a little private salt themselves. The merchant let out a wicked laugh, saying that smuggling salt was a grave crime. To set an example, he ordered the arms and legs of those who dared to secretly bring back salt to be broken. The people were furious. Everyone knew clearly that he was the biggest salt smuggler, yet he pushed them to a dead end. Despite their fear, due to the essential need, some people still risked their lives to smuggle salt to have something to eat. That day, a villager named Jin had secretly brought a packet of salt and was hurrying home under the cover of night. Midway, two men disguised as soldiers suddenly appeared and blocked his path. He was surprised because these two men didn't look like official bailiffs. He asked them where they were taking him. One replied that the King of Hell had issued an order: those who commit the crime of salt smuggling will be exiled to the underworld to wade through the mud of the river of oblivion and eat the filth of hell. Without another word, the two men put him in shackles. They took him to the underworld. The Ghost King took his register, looked at it, and scolded the two foolish soldiers for arresting the wrong person, as he was just a commoner, not a salt merchant. The Ghost King then took the opportunity to add that since the underworld was short-staffed, he invited the man to stay and work as a foreman for a few days. He would bring 2 bags of salt to his house as payment. It turned out that in the underworld, the filth from the 18 levels of hell had piled up in one place, forming large hills that had to be cleared. The river of oblivion, filled with floating corpses and bones, emitted an unbearable stench. The sight was truly horrifying. The Ghost King then ordered the salt merchants to be brought forth. He made them retrieve the bones and clear the filth under the supervision of Jin. The pitiful salt merchants were all chained together. They were forced to wade into the foul, disgusting river to retrieve corpses and clean up. Anyone who couldn't bear it and secretly tried to get ashore, the newly appointed man would use a whip to lash them back into the water. Among those being punished was that wicked merchant, which caught his particular attention. The merchant was covered in filthy mud, his face contorted, begging for his life. He had endured so much suffering in hell. 2 days later, having completed the task, the Ghost King ordered the man to be taken back home, ending his strange journey. When he opened his eyes, he was astonished to find himself lying in a coffin at his home, unable to believe his eyes. He then sat up and called for his wife. His wife was beside him, weeping tragically. She didn't know if her husband was dead or alive again. He then recounted in detail everything strange he had experienced in the underworld to his wife. She listened attentively. His wife recounted that 2 days ago she heard a knock from outside but saw no one. But surprisingly, when she ran to open the door, there was no one standing there, only an empty space. She was astonished to discover that someone had placed something right in front of her house. It was a complete mystery. It was 2 bags of salt, just as the Ghost King in the underworld had promised. The family finally had salt to eat. Someone on the road had found him dead by the wayside and kindly brought his body home. He still wasn't sure if he was dreaming or if it was real. It wasn't until he went out into the street and coincidentally met that wicked salt merchant again, a fateful encounter The merchant, all over his body, especially where the water of the river of oblivion had touched, was covered in gruesome ulcers, looking very terrible. Upon seeing him, the merchant trembled with fear like a blade of grass, afraid he would whip him again and push him into the river of oblivion. He hurriedly greeted him with great reverence. He was so scared he wet his pants on the spot, a sight both pitiful and laughable, showing his terrifying obsession. From then on, the wicked merchant learned a lesson he would never forget and no longer dared to raise the price of salt. Finally, the people had enough salt to eat.